Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to chat about profit bleeds, and it hurts your margin. And today we actually have a guest speaker, Todd Dawalt, and actually Red Team and Todd have partnered to produce a masterclass. And this masterclass will talk about exactly that, profit bleeding, and how can you optimize running your construction business. In the background, there'll be information about how Red Team can be leveraged to help that. But there's a lot of value beyond that. So definitely worth checking out. And there's a link here, right here, share.redteam.com/masterclass to learn more about it. And so we're very excited to do that together. And also, Todd has a great podcast. Definitely suggest you guys listening to it. A lot of always good content. I do listen to it in my car on the way to and from the office often. So it's a really good content. So very excited about having Todd with us today. Just a little bit of background on Red Team, project management software. We help construction companies optimize their business. That's really how we think about everything we build. One of our mission is, helping our commercial construction colleagues have peace of mind, which means making sure people have access to the right information at the right time, so stuff doesn't fall through the cracks, which eventually eats into your profit. So everything from business dev, project management, scheduling, field management, accounting, all of that put together in a nice package for you. But if you want to learn more, we can chat about it at another time without a problem. So if we think a little bit about managing profit, technology is taking a big role now. With COVID to work remote and so forth. So trying to think about the right tool, but also the right user. And Todd and I will speak a little bit to that. It's got a lot of impact, but it's only as good as how you use it, and how do you prepare to use it, and how do you plan around the tool itself. So there's a lot of moving parts to that conversation that are really important to understand. And so we'll be diving into that today, as far as smartphones and how you approach the different projects. Bottom line, good project management typically results into higher profit margin. Tracking your costs, making sure to bill properly. Don't do additional work until you've agreed to a price. All that free work that you end up doing. So how do you control these processes and stay ahead of it? So that's a big part of what we're going to talk about. And so really here we're going to talk about the symptoms, right? And so Todd, what do you mean by that? What do you say? What does that mean for you as far as treating the symptoms? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I'll start by telling a story that scared me away from being an engineer back when I was in college. I was in a structural engineering class, and they told us the story of the Kansas City Hyatt collapse, which prior to 9/11 was the most deadly structural collapse in America. So long story short, the grand opening, or shortly after the Kansas City Hyatt opened in 1981, these suspended skywalks in the atrium collapsed, and about 115 people were killed, over 200 were injured, hundreds of millions of dollars of damages. Lots of people lost their businesses, lost their license to practice engineering and architecture. And after all the carnage, after they cleaned things up, they went about trying to figure out what was the root cause. And what they found was, it's pretty fascinating actually, it's a little scary, but it came down to a slight modification on a shop drawing that was the root cause. Very small little detail was the root cause. And of course, their goal was to find out who to sue and who was at fault. But in the case of profit bleeds, like we're talking about today, we want to get to the root cause and figure out, why are we not getting paid for work? Why are we struggling with these profit bleeds? So the key is to stop screwing around treating symptoms, throwing time and money at symptoms, and get to the root cause. So if you really want to solve an issue, whatever it is, whether it's on your project, with your health, with your marriage, you've got to get to the root cause and put a system in place. And one of the most powerful things that I've ever come across for doing root cause analysis is something similar to what they did in Kansas City, when they tried to get to the root cause, doing a post-mortem analysis, which was to use this very powerful but very simple method called the 5 whys. And this comes out of manufacturing, Kaizen, lean manufacturing, et cetera, but it's really applicable and it's incredibly powerful. But it's basically you figure out what is the symptom that you want to solve. What's the profit bleed in this case? What's not working well? And then you ask, well, why is that happening? And you come up with a reason. And then you ask, well, why is that happening? And another reason, why is that happening? Why is that happening? And you keep asking why until you can't get any more answers. It's just, this is what it is. And when you can no longer get answers to the question, why is this happening? You have arrived at the root cause. And when you spend your time treating the root cause, then the symptoms will go away. But if you spend your time treating symptoms, you'll screw around treating symptoms and you'll never actually get to the root cause. So there are quite a few common symptoms that I've run into as I work with, and I've coached and trained hundreds of builders and even spent time in their offices. And some of the most common profit bleeds, as I like to call them, or symptoms or chaos on projects can include, I'll just list through these, and I'm curious for those of you listening, if any of these resonate with you. Holes in the scope. And questions come up like, well, who provides the security hardware? There's a gap in the scope. Is it the electrician? Is it the security guy? Is it the owner? But this is a symptom and a root cause of problems. Holes in the scope, missing equipment and materials. And what this sounds like is, well, the superintendent said he thought that the project manager had ordered the rebar. Or as I've heard on one job site, we're looking for these special Simpson brackets and everybody thought the other guy had ordered them. So missing equipment and materials, constant RFIs from your field team. If your project engineers and superintendents and the people on the job sites are constantly spending time circulating RFIs, then that's a root cause. Actually, that's a symptom. Sorry, that's a symptom of a deeper root cause. Other ones are like coordination.
It's perfect, because this RFI thing is always funny. Like I often talk with GCs and I go, I need a cleaner process because we have a ton of RFI on our projects. And sometimes I've asked a question, I go, okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it's really interesting how many GCs goes, no, that's part of what we're supposed to do. I was like, well, don't you want to try to minimize the number of RFIs? Because every RFI is a source for a potential problem, right? So I love this kind of idea of saying, hey, listen, trying to solve making RFIs easier is obviously important, but trying to avoid the RFI altogether to the extent that you can is probably even more valuable.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense.
That's a good point. So there's two ways we could handle it. We could either get better at turning RFIs around, we could get better at tracking them, we could get more efficient at processing RFIs, or we could get to the root cause and eliminate those RFIs, because I would prefer to have my project engineers and superintendents doing other stuff, actually leading the trades and scheduling and planning rather than chasing RFIs. Coordination misses. For example, a piece of owner furnished equipment shows up and it's supposed to be 277 volts and it's the wire and everything's been pulled for 208. That's a symptom of some problems. Rework because of missing details. One of the project that I worked on, I was walking around and the electrician had pulled carpet tile up to core drill through the suspended slab to install furniture poke-throughs. That's a symptom. That's a failure. And that's a symptom of some of these issues that we're talking about. And all of these things, holes in the scope, missing equipment, constant RFIs, coordination misses, all this rework, it leads to lost productivity, right? That's a profit bleed when you have people standing around, not being productive, waiting for information, waiting for equipment, waiting for materials, having to jump around and do things because they can't work productively. Schedule delays, which we'll talk about in a little more detail later on, which is actually a huge profit bleed. And then one of the most sinister things that I hate, which is what I call unsolicited charity, which is when you end up eating the cost of a change order or something that should have been a change order, but you have to eat it because something got missed, some of these other things. So these are some
I got missed, or wasn't, yeah, or he wasn't clear that it was actually a change order, right? Or sometimes you get charged by the sub and you can't pass on the cost because it wasn't clear that, hey, there's a change order from the sub, so I actually need to agree with the owner. I don't do anything until I've got agreement from the owner at that point, right? Managing that whole flow of information.
Yeah. So like with change orders, we can either get better at processing them faster and get better at fighting with our subs and better at fighting with their owners, or we can get better at preventing these things. Let's get to the root cause of these problems. And so what I found is that after spending a lot of time in people's offices and counseling and coaching business owners, there's actually one root cause that I typically start with. And the most common root cause is actually somebody brought me into their office there in Orlando a couple of years ago, and they were telling me about these symptoms, the problems that they were having. And I didn't really even have to ask. I just said, let's talk about the handoff. Let's talk about the handoff from the office to the field, because this is where most problems happen. This is, from my experience, running a construction company. I ran a company that had about 50 employees. By the time, after about 3 years, I'd grown the company from 15 employees up to 50 employees. I've been an owner's rep on projects ranging from $10 million up to $70 million. I've been a general contractor. I've seen it from all sides. I've been a subcontractor, I've been a business owner. And I can tell you, if you want to eliminate chaos, then go solve the big profit bleed, the root cause of your profit bleeds, which is very likely the botched handoff, or an edgier way to say it is the effed up handoff. Stop effing up your handoff, right?
Fair enough. So what's the best way? Like, you're talking about, like, getting that handoff right, like nailing it. So what is your advice around this? Like, what are the things to worry about? Like checklist. Like, what's your approach to getting that corrected in addressing that conversation?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The way I think about projects, if you think about your projects this way, number one, a project is really a series of handoffs. You're handing it off. Your client's coming, or the client is going to a designer, or an architect or an engineer, and they're handing off what's in their head to them. There's the handoff from the architect, the engineering team, to the general contractor, from the architects to the engineering team. Then once you get it as the general contractor, you're handing it off to your subs, handing it off from estimating to project management. And then, more general terms, where I would focus is the handoff from the office to the field. This is where things fall apart. Client comes in, they have all these conversations with the business development folks and pre-construction and estimating, and they've got it really clear in their head. And then in the rush to get the project kicked off, a lot of that information just sits in a OneDrive folder somewhere, or a Dropbox folder, or in a manila envelope, or in somebody's email box, and it never gets handed off, and you have problems. So that's number one, is think of your project as a series of handoffs. And then the second one, which you touched on earlier, is the way I think of it is your job as a project manager, or somebody's job managing a project, is to be an information broker, to get the right information to the right person at the right level of detail at the right time. So if nobody's doing that, if somebody's not being the information broker, then there are going to be lots of gaps in the handoff. And it's very likely that your handoff is going to be screwed up. So how do we nail the handoff? I've spent a couple of days with teams working through this, but I'll boil it down to really 3 things. Number one is to have a disciplined handoff process. When I say disciplined, think about the handoff from the office to the field a lot like a closing on a real estate transaction, right? So when you buy a house or buy a piece of land, buy a building, the title company comes in and they have, if there are 27 stipulations that have to be cleared, if you clear 26 of them, you're not going to close on that piece of property. It's just not going to close, because it has to be 100%. And that's the way you need to think about your handoff process. Be very disciplined about it. We will not let our estimator get away from this project until it is fully handed off. And the way you do that is to come up with the second thing, which is a well-defined handoff checklist. What does a handed off project look like? What does your superintendent need? What does your field team need in order to consider the job handed off? Do all subcontracts need to be bought out? Certainly they need contact information, a list of long lead submittals. There are certain things that your field team needs, and you need to put that in a handoff checklist. And then you need to have a handoff meeting. Don't just say, hey, check the folder, check the file, even if it's in red team. You need to have a meeting and then do a formal handoff, a brain dump, and make sure that every bit of information has been put into, in this case, put it into red team, which inherently helps a tremendous amount with the handoff, but then have a meeting, review things. There are little nuances, there are conversations, there are things that often get lost. And if you will be disciplined in the handoff and really focus a lot of energy on that, then it's very likely that you'll eliminate a lot of the chaos and a lot of the profit bleeds. In fact, people will come to me all the time and say, Todd, I want to systematize my entire business. I want to have systems and processes for everything. And I'll say, you probably don't need to do that. Let's systematize the handoff, and then we'll see what happens, because it's very likely that a lot of that chaos is going to go away. So that's my advice for nailing it.
So a follow-up question on that. So I'm trying to kind of visualize what that looks like, right? So everybody's meeting in the conference room. So we've got this project. We've got a contract in place with a client. We have a spec book. We've done the estimate. We've got so many estimates we've got in. We started to buy out the job. Is it a place where you basically force trigger questions? Hey guys, like I'm not clear on this. So how are we addressing that issue? Is this a submittal item, or is this like, is it kind of like the way we have the word red team, right? It's the team that comes into a battlefield, right, and looks at the plan of attack and pokes holes through it, going, hey, this is where you're gonna get in trouble here. This is kind of how you see the handoff, as like that moment in time where you try to poke holes through, where are my risks? What are the things that are left unanswered that I need clarification on? Is that how you see it?
Yeah. It's first of all, have a template, have a handoff checklist that says we're going to review this. We have to make sure all of this is uploaded into Red Team. We have to make sure that this is done. Some of its roles and responsibilities, and what it's going to do is force, let's say if before handoff, all long lead time submittals are submitted, and the estimator has to do that, or the pre-construction department has to do that, then that has to be their responsibility. And that superintendent is going to say, no, that's not my job. That's your job. You have to submit that stuff so that there are no gaps and there's no overlap where people are stepping on each other's toes.
So in other words, like setting proper expectation and accountability.
Absolutely. There's this great thing that I heard years ago. The best way to starve a horse is to have two people feed it.
Yeah.
So
no, I can see that.
If you have starving horses, you need to go find where the two people are who think the other guy is supposed to take care of it.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more with that statement. So another profit bleed you and I talked about was this whole, the schedule overruns. And that's not your fault, right? Life happens, right? You could have weather condition, people get sick, an accident. There's all sorts of things. Some things don't get delivered on time. You actually ordered the right parts, but the delivery was wrong. There's all these stuff that happens. So let's talk a little bit about that, because at the end of the day, as the GC, you own the problem, that you like it or not, right? So how do you think about all that?
Yeah. So I was in Nebraska a couple of years ago, and the CEO of the company had engaged me as a consultant, brought me out there because they've been in business for 20, 25 years, doing about $30 million in revenue a year. Great negotiated contracts, had a great team. They actually had a lot of work in backlog, but for the first time ever, they were losing money. And in Q1 of 2019, they lost about $100,000 in spite of the fact that they had all this work in backlog. And the CEO had a pretty good idea of what the problem was. So I came in, I talked to the CEO, met with her general manager, met with her controller, and we did a root cause analysis to figure out what the issue was. And what we found was that the projects were slipping, but they were slipping during a phase when basically her team felt like, well, it's not our fault. And it was slipping during the pre-construction phase and during the design phase. And what it was doing was it was hammering their bottom line because they had scheduled for the projects, they had their staffing plan put together. In some cases, they had hired people, and they were taking on all spending money on overhead costs and general conditions, but they didn't have anywhere to bill it to. So this was a schedule overruns or schedule delays on the front end of the project that were hammering her bottom line. And a couple of examples of what this actually looked like. We looked at one example, did a root cause analysis, and it was, for example, it was a $10 million hospital expansion project. And it was scheduled to start in August of 2018. And as we started to look at where it was, what happened was the architect was 2 months late delivering the CDs or the permit set because the architect was busy doing lots of other projects, in some cases for this GC and for the same client. And then there were a few rounds of permit comments that gobbled up another month of the project. And then the bids came in from subcontractors over budget. And they kind of knew it was over budget, but when the bids came back in, they had to go back and do value engineering, and that took another month. And then once they finally got ready to launch, they thought, then the owner's hazardous material abatement contractor, who was going to do asbestos and lead abatement, was booked up, and they were going to be 2 months. So it went from August, and we lost 2 months for the architect. We lost a month because of permit comments. We lost a month because of value engineering, 2 months from the hazardous material abatement guy. And here we are going from August, and we slipped into January. Now we're starting a project coming out of the ground in January as opposed to August, which has its own set of problems. But the big profit bleed here was they had 5 months of billings that slipped from 2018 into 2019. And they had all of these costs, overhead and general conditions
right.
and staffing, and they had nowhere to bill it against.
Yeah, it's not like they're going to stop paying their project managers all of a sudden, right?
Right.
No,
So
totally
that was the hidden profit bleed was these schedule delays, and the work was there, the profit was in there, but they weren't able to convert backlog into revenue, and it was hammering their bottom line.
So in that case, is it an issue where the GC needs to work with the owner and set an expectation around, hey, delays are out of my control. I'm going to need to be paid for because I'm still mobilizing my team. And how do you tackle that conversation? And I know in the masterclass you'll dig into that in detail. I get it. I'm just trying to go, how do you handle it, right?
Yeah. So having been a general contractor and having been an owner's rep myself, managing projects for Procter & Gamble, Duke Energy, some big corporate clients, I know how it feels when a contractor comes to me and says, hey, you got a problem and here's a change order. I didn't really do any extra work, but we're not adding any value to the project, but here's a change order. And it just doesn't feel right. So my advice is to start thinking a little differently, get outside of the GC box a little bit, which involves what I call right to left thinking. So right to left thinking is something I talk quite a bit about, which is really what it means is you figure out what the right side of the page looks like. And in this case, we want to launch our project at a certain time. So even though maybe we don't have a signed contract yet, we don't have a notice to proceed, it's not really our problem yet, it's going to cause problems if this project slips. So let's map out the right side of the page, operate from right to left. And in this case, the right side of the page is we want to get to launch. We want to launch this project on the schedule that works for us, that we've staffed for, we've planned for. Let's get in the driver's seat, and we'll try like hell to make this thing happen on our timetable. So we establish the launch date, and then we work backwards from there. And we start to identify the risks and the obstacles. All right, what's it going to take to launch this project? These risks and obstacles can be people. They can be authorities having jurisdiction. I like to call them pre-launch influencers. So the owner is certainly one. The architect, the engineer, could be local, state, federal organizations. I had a project where I had to get through the Federal Aviation Administration to approve a project. Corps of Engineers with floodplain issues. If you work backwards, in some complicated sites, there can be a dozen of these obscure pre-launch influencers and risks and obstacles. And then you ask the question, all right, what would it take to make this happen? You get to the first obstacle, permit review, for example. You ask, all right, how long do you need to review this? And they'll tell you, and you would say, all right, it's going to take 8 weeks to get a building permit. And you work backwards from there. What is it going to take to be ready to get our building permit submission by this date? And you work backwards and identify these risks and obstacles. And then what you're doing is you're leading your client through this process. You're leading your client through a phase that's not really your problem, but here's what you have to remember. I had a guy came to one of my live events, and he made this statement that really stuck with me. And he said, they're not professional customers, right? So these people you're working with, in many cases, they're not professional customers. They don't do this all the time. If you're dealing with a doctor or a facility manager, they don't do big capital projects all the time. So lead them. And there are a couple of specific examples that we came up with the team in Nebraska on the next slide that answers the question, like, well, what do we do? How do we actually and practically lead our people? And the way you lead your people or you lead your customers would be to, first of all, create an owner or tenant responsibility checklist. And if you could pop that next slide up, Fred.
Yep, sorry.
This is what we came up with. These are real live practical strategies we came up with the team in Nebraska. And they said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come up with a checklist for our clients as soon as they bring us on board. And we're going to lead them and tell them, hey, do you have hazardous materials that need to be dealt with? Do you have equipment that needs to be moved? Do you need to buy furniture and fixtures and things like that? And lead them through the process. Tell them what their responsibilities are. You may have stuff listed in your contract, but tell them, put it on a piece of paper and give them some dates. Give them a pre-construction schedule. And you develop a pre-construction schedule that gets this project to launch on a time frame. And then you get buy-in from all the parties. And what doesn't work is to try to shove this down the throat of the design team, but you say, hey, look, here's the deal. In order to start this project for our client on time, here's what we need to do. And then you ask this question: what would it take for you to hit this date? What would it take for you to have your 80% permit submission drawings ready? What would it take to be able to have this permit in hand by this point? And you get them to buy in. It's very similar to a lean construction last planner type meeting you would have with people on the job site. And you're getting them to make commitments to meet what needs to happen for the project. So those are 3 specific things you can do is come up with a responsibility checklist to let them know what needs to happen. Because you think about like hazardous material, what happened in Nebraska was they said, okay, let's rock and roll. And somebody said, okay, let's call the hazmat guy. And then he said, look, I'm booked up for 2 months, and the project stalled.
Right. No, I get it. So So let's kind of summarize this, right? I mean, like we're kind of getting close to that 30-minute time we give ourselves, and so let's summarize a little of the action items and takeaway that we've discussed, about addressing those root cause of those that two profit bliss we talked about today. And
Yep, absolutely. So if you're wondering, what do I do now? Well, if you'll focus on nailing the handoff, number one, just look at the handoff from the office to the field. Come up with a disciplined process, come up with a handoff checklist and a handoff meeting. That's going to solve a lot of the problems. And then number two is think, how do we lead our projects during pre-construction and design? Maybe it's not your responsibility. You don't have a contractual obligation, but I can tell you, if you lead your clients through that process, they're going to think very highly. They're going to see a lot of value. They're going to feel good about working with you, and you're going to distance yourself from the competition. So those are two great places to start eliminating profit bleeds right there.
Well, this is awesome. I mean, a lot of, I think, great advice. And what I like about the place you come from is that it's not from a, I guess, consultant. I'm going to use the C word here. You've lived it. This is not second-hand knowledge. It's not theoretical. You've taken the punches and lived through those pains. And obviously, we share a lot of war stories with our clients, so we get it. Like it's a big deal. And it's always the proverbial, you got to plan and plan again to make sure that you can actually execute, right? People think about execution, but really execution starts in planning and how do you actually plan ahead to actually execute. And so there's always this kind of funny thing in construction that people are anxious to move a shovel, right? And really trying to be cautious about this organization in the beginning is really important. And for everybody listening, this is why we're doing this masterclass. Is for us, we think that that's our role in the construction industry at Red Team, is to provide information and tools to help construction companies eliminate all these profit bleeds. And what are the right approaches to this? And it's what we partnered with Todd to deliver this masterclass. So anybody who is interested in, you don't have to be a Red Team customer. You don't even have to want to be a Red Team customer, quite frankly. Just know that, Red Team will be part of the conversation because that's part of the context of this masterclass. But I think you got a good sense of, the way Todd thinks about the construction industry. And it's definitely a thought that very much aligns with how we think about our place in the industry. So we're excited for this masterclass to come together. I think it'll be live probably in about a month. Is that what we're planning on to start the first masterclass, somewhere in there?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay, cool. Well, we're really excited about this, Todd. Thank you for your time today. And looking forward to chat more because I think this is amazing content and I think a lot of takeaways there for construction companies to go. And how am I doing this really? Am I really hitting that pause button at the right time, get everybody at the table and discuss the game plan and how we're going to tackle this project and what are the gaps? I often say that to win the project, you have to make sure that the people that need to know what they need to know when they need to know it. And I know it's a mouthful, but once you hear it and you say it a couple of times, you go, yeah, that makes sense. So that's definitely how we think about it. So thank you very much, Todd. We're excited about this masterclass. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And speaking of the masterclass, one last request. For those of you watching, we need your help to make this masterclass as beneficial as possible. So if you go to the link on the screen, share.redteam.com/masterclass, there's a 2 or 3 minute survey there. Love to get your feedback. If you could take a couple of minutes and help us answer a couple of questions to make sure that we address the issues that you're having trouble with, because we want to make it as valuable as possible for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Todd.
My pleasure. Thanks, Fred.
All right. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.